Hello everyone, welcome to Disclosure Scotland's webinar on PVG regulated rules. My name is Stephen, I'm from the customer engagement team here at Disclosure Scotland and I'm going to take you through today's session. In this webinar we cover a handful of key topics. We cover what's changed around eligibility for the PVG scheme, so what rules are and are not in. I'll touch on briefly a wee summary of the PVG scheme itself. I'll then move on to talking about certain key terms around regulated rules. We'll then move on to how do you assess whether a role is considered a regulated role and requires PVG scheme membership. And lastly, I'll go through a few examples to illustrate some of the key points that we'll talk about. Before I go on to those, I'll always want to highlight a couple of key resources that will be useful for you as an organisation or as a person looking to use the PVG scheme to make recruitment decisions. One is an online checker that helps you assess whether a role is considered a regulated role under the legislation and requires PVG scheme membership. The link to this will be in the description below as well. Another key resource that's good to highlight is the full regulated rules guidance. This is a downloadable document that will give you an exhaustive explanation of all the facets about whether something is a regulated rule or not and what to take into account. In terms of what's changed around eligibility for the PVG scheme, there's a few things that we need to highlight. As of the 1st of April 2025, PVG is now a legal requirement to carry out a regulated role. We do have a 3-month grace period for those who need to become a member of the PVG scheme who weren't before. This grace period ends on the 1st of July 2025. The minimum age for PVG and any disclosure check in Scotland is now 16 years old. Regulated roles are eligible for the PVG scheme membership instead of the term that was used previously, which was regulated work. So if you're speaking with my colleagues here at Disclosure Scotland or you're looking at our resources, we use the term regulated roles as an umbrella term to cover anything that's eligible for the PVG scheme. To go into more specifics about changes to eligibility for PVG, there's a couple of key things to highlight. We've updated the definitions of protected adults and regulated activity. The impact of these changes is that it brings in those who are working to support those who are homeless or who have suffered or could be suffering domestic abuse. General hospitals and hospices have been added to the list of locations specifically named in the legislation. Now previously, places of work such as schools, further education colleges, care homes, it didn't matter really what you were doing in them, just that the fact that you had the potential for unsupervised contact with children or protected adults brought you into the PVG scheme. Now we've also added general hospitals and hospices to that criteria, and again we'll touch on these things in more detail later on. We've also introduced the element of power and influence to contact with children and protected adults, and this is because there were certain rules before that weren't eligible for the PVG scheme previously but felt like they should be. And that's why this element of power and influence has came in terms of what's eligible and what's not. And this brings in sports agents and talent scouts for the first time. One key thing to highlight, especially for those that have used the PVG scheme previously, roles that were previously regulated work under the PVG Act, they are also still regulated roles. So i.e., if you were previously eligible for PVG, you will still be eligible. We're not changing roles that were eligible before the new legislation came in. This is about bringing in roles that should have been in the first place and are now because of the new legislation. There's a few key things to highlight because of these changes. One, it is an offence for an individual to be in a regulated role without PVG scheme membership for that group. So if you're doing a regulated role with children, you have to be a member of the PVG scheme for children. It is an offence for an organisation to offer a regulated role without having had sight of a PVG scheme check for that group. So if you're an organisation that are looking to recruit an individual for a role, you can't start them in that role until you've completed and seen their PVG scheme check. In a personal employment situation, the service user is not committing an offence. Now this is a big one to highlight. It is as if individuals who are doing regulated roles without PVG are committing an offence. Organisations who are allowing individuals to do regulated roles without a PVG check are committing an offence. But we also know there's personal employment situations. So if you decide you want to hire someone as a personal carer and you're doing it yourself using funding or whatnot, but you're making decisions yourself, or say you hire a private tutor for somebody, if you do it without getting a PVG scheme check, you yourself are not committing an offence. It is only the person conducting the regulated role. What's not changed? Well, there's a few key things here. The time-limited scheme membership that has been a big part of the Disclosure Scotland Act will not be implemented until April 2026. The continuous monitoring of PVG scheme members is still in place. So once you join the PVG scheme, not only do you get the results of a check, we monitor your details every single day to make sure that you remain suitable to do regulated roles. An organisation's duty to refer. If certain conditions are met, i.e. if an individual is removed from a regulated role because they've caused harm to a child or a protected adult, an organisation has a legal obligation to let us know about it. It is also unlawful to apply for PVG when the individual is not conducting a regulated role. Now this is an important one. You can't just apply for PVG because you would like it, or it's a preference, or just on safety's sake, just in case. It's only for people conducting regulated roles. The PVG scheme is here for a specific purpose. It is specifically for regulated roles in Scotland with children and or protected adults. What makes PVG unique is it is not just a one-off check. Yes, you get your results, but you're also enrolling that individual into continuous monitoring. I'm going to explain a bit further about continuous monitoring in just a second. It registers the organisation as an interested party on that person's PVG scheme membership. So what that means is, if we encounter new information that could affect that person's suitability to conduct regulated work or regulated roles, it entitles that organisation to automatic updates from us at Disclosure Scotland. That's why organisations make PVG scheme applications. It's not just to get the results of the check, it's to make sure that they automatically receive any information that could affect their suitability going forward. Now, continuous monitoring is what makes PVG unique. We monitor all PVG scheme members throughout their membership. That means every new piece of police information that comes in, every change to someone's details is all automatically fed in, and we, day in, day out, we get up to 40,000 updates per day from police. And we have to look at that information and go, does this belong to any of our PVG scheme members? And could it affect their suitability to conduct a regulated role? It's not just conviction information though. There's other information like other relevant information, which is police intelligence, that can also be fed in. All of this information through continuous monitoring triggers what we call the consideration for listing process. So if we receive information that makes us believe we have to take a closer look at that individual's suitability to conduct a regulated role, we will put them under further investigation known as consideration for listing. And we cover this in our Duty to Refer webinar, which will be available shortly. It's also worth highlighting, if you are a registered counter-signatory with Disclosure Scotland, you are also subject to periodic suitability checks. We have to make sure that our counter-signatories who are registered to use and access the PVG scheme remain suitable to access and manage people's personal sensitive information. Now, there's a key point with PVG that I always like to highlight. If someone is barred from regulated roles do not issue a PVG. So what that means is, if you as an organisation receive the results of a PVG, even if it has other information on it about possible convictions, other relevant information, the fact you have got that result back tells you that person is not barred from doing that regulated role. Now, you could use the information however you wish to make a recruitment decision, but we are telling you something just by giving you a result in the first place. If we receive an application from someone who is barred from doing regulated roles, we stop the application, we inform the organisation they will not be receiving the results of that PVG, and they cannot recruit that individual in that role. We explain some of these other facets about barring, consideration for listing, and the duty to refer in our duty to refer webinar. So I would certainly recommend that you check that out. Let's now move on to some of the key terms around the PVG scheme and regulated roles. Children or protected adult. Under the legislation, these things have specific definitions. A child is nice and simple. It's anyone under the age of 18. Under PVG legislation, that is the definition of a child. A protected adult is a little bit more complicated. A protected adult is anyone 18 or over who is homeless, receiving a health or community service, requires assistance with activities of daily living, is experiencing or is at risk of experiencing domestic abuse, or has an impaired ability to protect themselves from physical or psychological harm because of a physical or mental disability, illness, infirmity, or ageing. A protected adult is not a permanent status or label. You're only considered a protected adult whilst you are receiving a service addressing one of those listed needs. The example we always use is everyone every 6 months has to go for a checkup to the dentist. When I receive my reminder I have to have a dental checkup, I'm not a protected adult. When I enter the dental practice and I let the reception know that I'm there and I'm waiting to be seen, I'm not a protected adult. When I enter the practice room and sit in the chair and the dentist looks at my teeth, I am a protected adult at that point. When I leave that practice room, make another appointment and leave the dental practice, I'm no longer a protected adult. It's only whilst I'm receiving that service that I'm considered a protected adult. Let's look at how do we assess whether a role is considered a regulated role or not and requires PVG scheme membership. Now, in this, under the changes from the legislation, we've broke it down into 3 basic steps. 1, is the role on the regulated roles list? 2, are you doing a regulated activity? And 3, do you have contact with children or protected adults? These are the questions we use internally to assess whether the role is a regulated role or not, and it's what we encourage organisations and other stakeholders to do as well. It's also how it will be broken down in all our forms of guidance, on the online checker, on the downloadable guidance, on any queries that you send to us directly at Disclosure Scotland. This is how we will address it. So the first one, is it on the regulated roles list? Well, the regulated roles list is available on the regulated role checker, the online checker that we linked to earlier. The link to it is also in the description below. These roles that are on the list, these are the roles where the eligibility for the PVG scheme is crystal clear. There should be no grey areas with these ones. So roles such as a teacher, a nurse, a personal carer, a children's sports coach. Ones where it's very clear that they should require PVG scheme membership, and we don't really have to take it any further. But if it's not in that list, what then do you do? Well then, the thing to think about is, are you doing an activity? This is where we look at what is the role doing? what are the duties involved in the role? Activities that are included in the legislation includes having responsibility for the safety and welfare of a child, teaching, instructing, training or supervising protected adults, practicing as a registered medical practitioner, i.e. a nurse, midwife or a health visitor. These are all things that are considered regulated activities under the law. The full list of regulated activities for children and regulated activities for protected adults, again, is available on our online checker. A key thing with the regulated activity though is it has to be a normal duty. If you carry out a regulated activity that is part of your role, it's something that you're expected to do on an ongoing basis, that pushes it into the realms of PVG eligibility. It doesn't have to be a particular frequency, so it doesn't have to be something that you do day in, day out, or every week. It doesn't matter how often you do it, just that you're expected to do so. It can also just be one part of your overall role. It doesn't have to be the main part, it can just be one part of your role as a regulated activity. But there are some places where it doesn't matter what you're doing, it actually matters where you're doing it. And this is what I mentioned earlier in the webinar. There's certain locations named in the Act. In these locations, specifically named in the Disclosure Scotland Act, it doesn't matter if the role has a regulated activity or not, only that they have the opportunity for unsupervised contact with children or protected adults. So if you're doing any form of work in one of these places I'm about to name, it doesn't matter what you're doing, only that you have the opportunity for unsupervised contact with children or protected adults. So for children, this includes schools, further education colleges, daycare premises, hospitals, hostels. For protected adults, it includes hospitals, hospices, care homes. These are all locations specifically named in the legislation. And if you're carrying out work in one of these premises and have the opportunity for unsupervised contact, you should be in the PVG scheme. The last thing we think about, do you have contact with children or protected adults? And this is a critical thing to consider. Whether with children or protected adults, you must have contact in one of these forms: physical contact, visual, written or verbal communication, or exercising power or influence. Now, our checker has a full description of what we mean by power and influence, because there's a few facets to it, but really what it boils down to is, are you doing these activities specifically for children or protected adults and have one of these forms of contact with them? There's one form of contact though that isn't eligible for the PVG scheme: incidental contact. This does not meet the criteria for a regulated role. What we mean by incidental contact is contact that comes about even though the service is open to everyone. It's available to everyone, it's not targeted specifically for children or protected adults. Contact is likely to be incidental when it is open to everyone, or the attendance is discretionary. Contact is unlikely to be incidental when it is targeted at children or protected adults, or the attendance is mandatory. So as an example, let's just say in a previous role I was in a place of work and a child entered the premises and it was just the child and myself. Should I be in the PVG scheme? Sometimes your inclination might be, yes, you're alone with a child, but I was working in a shop. It was a Sunday morning. I was working the floor by myself. I opened the shutters and a child was the first person into the shop. That doesn't feel proportionate that I should be a member of the PVG scheme for that. That's the sort of thing we're talking about when we say incidental contact. So in summary, if the role is on the regulated roles list or has a regulated activity and meets our contact criteria, it is a regulated role and needs PVG. If it doesn't meet any of this criteria, it's not a regulated role, and it does not require PVG. Now keep in mind, when you make this assessment, that'll be looking at the role as it is just now. But keep in mind, a role's duties could change. So it might be somebody is given a new duty that actually that's now considered a regulated activity, and what was once not considered a regulated role could now be and require PVG scheme membership. What is not a regulated role? Well, working with the general public, i.e. incidental contact, activities conducted in the course of a family or a personal relationship, working alongside colleagues under the age of 18, school placements for work experience, and work taking place outside of the United Kingdom. Any regulated roles taking place in England and Wales, they will require checks that are conducted by our colleagues in the Disclosure and Barring Service. Remember, the PVG scheme is specifically for regulated roles in Scotland. Okay, let's apply that assessment to a few example roles. Let's think about a bus driver. Should a bus driver be in the PVG scheme? Well, let's break it down. Not every bus driver is doing the exact same thing or has the exact same duties. If you are what we call a normal service bus driver, so you're driving the normal route that goes through your town or your city and it picks open to all members of the public, that's not providing a targeted service. You're providing a service that's open to everyone. It's not targeted specifically at children or protected adults. So that means any contact that you may have is incidental. And the route the bus takes doesn't affect its eligibility. It may go by a school, it may go by a hospital. That doesn't affect its eligibility. A normal service bus driver is not eligible for the PVG scheme. It is not considered a regulated role. But what if you're a bus driver specifically for a school or a care home? You are going about specifically picking up children on the school route going to school. Okay, well now it's a bit different. You're providing a service exclusively for children. And it's actually named in the regulated roles list. It specifically says in the rules list school bus driver. It's also the activity that you're doing, providing transport services exclusively for children. That's listed as a regulated role activity. And you have contact with children. It's a regulated role and requires PVG scheme membership. Okay, what about a maintenance worker? Could be an electrician, a plumber, engineer, any form of maintenance worker. Might not strike you as immediately needing PVG scheme membership. It's not the thing we think about when we think about regulated roles. But a normal maintenance worker, yeah, their duties, none of those duties are really in the regulated roles activities list. And if you do have any contact with children or protected adults, that's going to be incidental. You're only eligible for a level 1 disclosure. It's not a regulated role. But what if it takes place in one of the named locations I mentioned earlier? What if it takes place in, say, a school? Well, if you're doing work in school grounds and you have the opportunity for unsupervised contact with children, it's a regulated role. So if you're doing work whilst the children are there and there's the opportunity for you to have unsupervised contact with them, you should be getting a PVG check. If the work is taking place in a school, but it's in the off period, it's the summer holidays, the children aren't there, you're not going to have that opportunity, are you? So, you're not going to be considered a regulated role. It's that opportunity for unsupervised contact with children or protected adults. That's the critical factor when it comes to these named locations. Okay, what about a personal carer? This would seem a very clear one, an obvious one that should be in the PVG scheme, but we have to think about it a little bit. What if it's done by a family member? You do not need PVG scheme membership to help take care of your family member. What if though you're a professional personal carer and you've been engaged by an individual to provide support to them. Okay, well, that's named in the regulated rules list for protected adults. The activity is you've been engaged by or on behalf of a protected adult to support them to live independently. That's said explicitly in the activities. And obviously, you're going to have contact with a protected adult because of this. That makes it a regulated role, and you should have a PVG scheme membership. Let's look at a last one. A music tutor. Okay. What if you're a music tutor who offers lessons in, say, a group environment that's open to everyone? You're not targeting it at a specific group. Well, that means any contact that you have with children or protected adults, that's incidental, isn't it? So that means you're only eligible for a level 1 disclosure, and it's not considered a regulated role. But what if you offer one-to-one tuition? Or you have classes that are specifically just for children? Well, that's named in the regulated rules list for children or protected adults. If you are acting as a private tutor or a tutor specifically just for children, you're providing a service exclusively for them. Teaching, instructing, training children is considered a regulated role activity, and obviously you will have contact with children because of this. So if you're a private tutor for a child or providing tuition in a class environment that's just for children, that's considered a regulated role and requires PVG scheme membership. Now remember, there's a lot of good resources out there to help you establish if a role requires PVG scheme membership or not. We have our online checker, which will ask some simple questions and help you establish whether a role is considered a regulated role and requires PVG scheme membership. And we also have our in-depth guidance. This is a document that will take you through all these different facets. It will have a lot more examples and a lot more helpful points to assist you in making the right decision about this. To end on, just want to remind everyone that since the 1st of April 2025, PVG is a legal requirement for all regulated roles with children and protected adults. Thank you for watching. I hope you found this useful, and hopefully I'll see you in another webinar in the future.